The Call of the Sea is a collection of short stories from Leaf by Leaf Press. It takes readers on an idiosyncratic odyssey where they will encounter a motley array of characters, often at liminal points in their lives, be they at the edge of myth or in the middle of muddling through the mundane. The stories are set in different times, landscapes and seascapes. Paradoxically, the anthology was compiled during a global pandemic by writers whose lives were temporarily less eclectic, although challenged by shielding, major surgery, and bereavement. The writers hope, therefore, that the stories prove therapeutic, in addition to offering a variety of great reads. Trixie Roberts has 6 stories in The Call of the Sea, including The Ben Harding, Late for the Wedding, The Bend in the Track, Flower Power, and Last Orders at the Library. Here, Trixie reads an extract from her story, On the Cloud.
When Brenda arrived, I could smell the fresh pies. Oh, I'm glad you brought those pies, Brenda. I've had no time to bake this morning. No worries, Dolly. And I got some of those biscuits you like too, the ones like a currant sandwich. Vivaldi biscuits. Anyway, you could have texted me to remind me to get them on that new mobile of yours. Oh, I haven't got that far yet, I said. I'm still trying to work out how to turn it on. Here, I'll help, she said. And in no time, she'd got it switched on and was showing me how it does its tricks. And this is the point where I'd rather be doing something else. So I went off into the kitchen to put the kettle on for tea before the pies went cold. You're very good at this, I said to Brenda when I dared to creep back into the living room. Oh, she says, young Sally tries to teach me something new every time she visits. Sally is Brenda's granddaughter. Like my grandson, Jake, she's a tech wizard, and they're both surgically attached to their phones. Brenda said, Sally's never without hers. She's either typing on it, listening to it, speaking into it, or taking photographs of herself, her friends, and heaven knows what else on it. It's an affliction. You mean addiction, I said. After we'd eaten our pies, Brenda started to give me a lesson in how to send a text message. I was beginning to get the hang of it, but it seemed to show me the wrong words, even when I was sure I'd typed the right ones. Oh, that's predictive text, said Brenda, and it's a right nuisance. I texted Sally last week and said to her, do you know Alice in Wonderland? She texted back and said, where's Sunderland, Grab? I think she meant Gran. We carried on typing, and I sent Brenda a text that said, your tea's gone cold.
Wendy Lodwick-Lowdon has written 6 stories in Call of the Sea, including In Our Times, Far and Away, The First Thing I'll Do, Kindred, and Teetering. This reading is taken from the opening passages of the short story The Cannibals of Nesscliffe Hill.
George, they smelled abominably of grease, wood ash, and offal. Not surprising, of course, but still most unpleasant. They were dressed in layers of stained, motley clothes, and the woman wore pantaloons under her smock and a man's jacket over it. Mitchell Heppel's report had taken place while relaxing in front of the fire after sharing a generous supper with his host. He had been drinking port and paying his way with a bit of tittle-tattle, and he knew most of what he told his friend would be relayed to his friend's wife and thence to the parish. Bowls of water and a piece of lye soap were provided at my instigation, as sensible action before giving them clothing. But they were thrown to the ground by the taller and thinner man in a passion. He gobbled and growled at me like an animal. I tell you, George, I was glad the guard was between us. The vicar, Mitchell Heppel, had not said the thin man had thrown the water at him, and his jacket had been splashed and his new brogue stained by the assault. He also had not informed the squire that, although he could not understand the utterances, So infested as they were by dialect and idiom, the guard had been able to translate the speech. "He says you are a liar and a devil in dress-up." Tom Wall, the guard, tried to keep his tone neutral. "He says you told him to trust the squire would do right by him. He didn't, but instead supported wicked farmer Jarnden."
Bernard Pearson has written 4 stories for the anthology, including Neville and the Guardian, Playing Host, and The Great Geraldo. Here he reads an extract from a supernatural tale set in mid-Wales called The Overlooked.
The days were getting warmer, and Sarah spent more and more of her time under the portico of the chapel, reading and painting. Among the many things she had enjoyed and excelled in at school was art. She was working on a landscape of the valley as it opened out to the south, the river meandering its way down towards the Wye and ultimately the Bristol Channel. The fields had a reddish tint to them, and the combine harvesters would soon be making their stately way down the lanes around Lansharad. Sarah became more and more absorbed by the picture. She would spend every spare minute trying to get every detail right. How she wanted it. The muted tones of the valley, through her brushwork, was transformed into an exuberant explosion of vibrant primary colours. Greg's aggression towards her diminished for a while. He was involved in an ambitious proposal to put a barrage across the Severn, and so in what little time he spent with Sarah at the chapel, he was very much preoccupied. At night, when Greg was away, she sometimes fancied she could hear children's voices again, wafting in at the open skylight. She began almost to get used to it and find it companionable in a way. The next meeting of the Lansharad Historical Society took place in the evening of what has been an exceptionally hot late summer's day. The last of the great hay carts had rolled up from the valley, squeezing through the narrow streets of the village and on to the farms halfway up the mountain.
R.J. Turner has 5 stories in the anthology, including After All These Years, Drowned, Dream House, and Woman in the Moon. This extract is from the short story Package to India.
One afternoon, at the ashram, Margaret was sitting on a low wall, writing a postcard to her husband, when she became aware that Mukhat was standing behind her. She quickly dropped her card into a pocket as he spoke softly. "This is a very special place for me, Margaret. When I came back to India, I was in a terrible state of mind. It was not so much that I had left my family behind, but that I didn't really care. I felt this tremendous sense of waste, realizing that I had lived half of my life without really knowing what I had done with it. Apparently, this was one of Gandhi's favourite retreats, so I stayed here and began to make some sense." He broke off suddenly, took Margaret's arm and lifted her up. "Watch," he commanded, pointing northwards. She looked as directed and saw nothing at first, except the usual veil of cloud which had covered the northern horizon since they arrived. Then the cloud began to drift away, like stage curtains drawing aside, and behind it a whole new landscape began to emerge of gigantic, sunlit, snowy peaks. Margaret had thought they were already high up, but now she found herself lifting her gaze higher and higher to take in those sharp summits of rock and ice. She felt slightly faint and leant back against her companion. He opened his arms, and she relaxed momentarily into his comforting grip, then quickly disentangled herself as the cloud reformed over that staggering scene.
Vicky Turrell has a number of serious and lighter vignettes in the anthology, including Overheard in a Late Night Chemist, Overheard in a Cafe, In the end, there's only you, the silence before, and the slugs are back. She has also written 4 short stories: The Bend in the River, I See No Ships, Town and Country, and the story she reads from here, Shampoo.
When my daughter Sophie was at home, my shampoo bottle was always empty. She has lovely hair, and she washed it every day with my special shampoo. It's expensive shampoo, luxurious and rich. It has all the things that my life has lacked, and it has always been my special treat. I've never had much money, not to spend on myself. I've always given Sophie everything I could. It's not that I've ever begrudged her anything. In fact, I've tried to give her everything she wanted. So maybe it's my fault that my shampoo bottle was always empty. And maybe it's my own fault that I had to bring up Sophie on my own. You see, I was not careful enough when I met Mark. We were very young and very much in love. We were flying high. What could go wrong? What went wrong was that Mark fell for someone else and left me. And I fell to earth with a bump. He also left me with another bump, and that turned out to be Sophie. Not that I complain, of course. You understand. I loved her as soon as I saw her, and I knew then that I would do anything for her and give her everything I could. The trouble was, my job at the supermarket didn't pay a great deal. I still carried on buying things for her, though, especially things like sparkly slides for her hair. And her smile and her warm arms round my neck made it all worthwhile. The years seemed to speed by, and soon she was at school. And I know I'm biased, but she looked so lovely in her uniform, with her hair like a halo round her head. I'd washed it in my special shampoo that morning, of course. There was always that special party that she needed a new outfit for. There was always that special club she was going to. And of course she wanted the latest trend. And although I was broke, she could twist me round her little finger. You wouldn't want me to look stupid next to my cool friends, would you, Mum? She wheedled.
Kirstie Edwards has 3 stories in the anthology: Rosetta, Tricks of the Memory, and Crossing Paths at Christmas. This extract is from Rosetta.
On one particular occasion, she became very aware of something unfamiliar to her natural life sequence. She saw pictures of herself with a man. He hit her hard across her face. He was making loud noises, but she could not interpret his meaning. Nor could she understand his violent gestures. The man was a stranger to the village, and passing through, he had happened to see Rosetta clutching a large stone in one hand. Her grip was so tight that the sharp edge of the rock was cutting deep into her flesh, so her blood flowed freely. However loud he spoke to her, Rosetta did not seem to hear, nor even look at him directly. Assuming that she was blind and deaf, the man tried to take the stone out of her hand, but she would not let it go. He hit her to bring her to her senses, but the stone remained fast in her grip. Rosetta tried to understand. She screwed her eyes up tightly and willed to understand, to be there. She knew what she was looking for now, something in between. Not in her head, but she couldn't find it. She screamed, for she could not speak. Then the power which controlled her so completely took command once more. Later, while standing on the cliff, she saw a scene in her mind. She saw herself kill the man. She had hurled the heavy stone at him. It hit his head and he fell instantly to the ground. The blood from 2 soles now covered the stone.
John Heap's stories in the anthology include The Call of the Sea, Manaslu, and Two's Company. In this extract, John is reading from his story, The Ledge.
They both looked out. The rock was sheltering them from the worst of the weather, but periodically it would be blasted by an aberrant gust. Snowflakes, the quintessential image of softness, gravel hard, ricocheting down their necks. Mike continued. But then again, it was probably all that ale the night before. That was a night, eh? Tell you what, though, you're on a promise with that Michelle. She couldn't take her eyes off you. Chris allowed himself a smile as he thought about her, that night, the drink, the plans, the warmth, especially the warmth. Chris used to have romantic notions about alpine bivouacs, with the beckoning lights of the valley emphasising the distance from the familiar. Not anymore. All he saw was grey. Dusk grey, mist grey, nothing grey, and despite the drop below he felt himself strangely claustrophobic. He wished for the night, but then he wouldn't be able to see what he couldn't see. The snow drifted up behind Chris's shoulders, but trying to dislodge it made it fall behind his back, pushing him further from the cliff and making his seat feel even more precarious. For the first time, Chris wondered whether this could get serious, whether their discomfort could shift into something more dangerous. I'm glad I didn't get off with that Michelle, said Chris. What? Why's that? Mike was irritable again. Well, just imagine the inquest, what it would do to Sue. Michelle was the last person to see me alive. That'd be hard for her, wouldn't it? For God's sake, Chris, what inquest? Don't you worry, I'll be there. I'll give them their statement. I'll tell them how you're a miserable, pessimistic shit right to the end, okay?
The Call of the Sea is available now from Amazon.